You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1.
Hey everybody, it's Trumpets here, and you might be thinking, well, you're not Spanners, and if so, good. People do sometimes confuse us, so good for noticing. But yeah, I've been given the exciting option of sharing my reactions to qualifying, and I'm kind of a big information data sort of guy. I really like to do a lot of research, but I thought for this, I would go opposite. Old school, no timing, nothing, just what the comms give me and what I know myself. And, well, it was an exciting qualifying. They're not always exciting, but this one was, and not just for the occasional drama or weird thing happening. There was genuine doubt as to who's going to come out on top, and we don't always get that. And I will say, just on a side note, I kind of love watching these cars at night. Unless you're maybe a photographer taking a picture of it and is still in the golden hour where you have just that amazing sunlight. I really think these cars kind of look their best under the lights at night. Given that, what's to love about qualifying? Today's, and in general, that's where the cars are the fastest. That's where we see their strengths, their weaknesses. That's where their nasty side of their personality will show itself. And so, in that sense, always a fun time. But you probably care a little bit less about that and a little bit more about what actually happens. So let's get right to it. The reason you're here right now is because we've got a championship. We've got 3 people technically with a chance to win, depending on what happens tomorrow, going to the last race. And so I'm going to start with them. And you think, oh, here we go. Here we go. It's going to be all about the tires. And yeah, it kind of plays into it. But I used to play poker very casually with some people who went on to be kind of serious players. And there's 2 ways to play poker. You can go by the numbers, and always make the plays when the cards look like this, and you do well. But then there's people who just play by being able to read and by being unable to be read. And I'm just kind of wondering why Norris seems so unbelievably happy. He got beaten by his teammate, he messed up his final lap, and it just did not seem like it bothered him at all. And maybe he's just done a good job with his sports psychologist and has been able to put it. But I don't know. I think after that qualifying, Norris quietly thought to himself, you know what? I was faster on the first lap. And with 2 chances, Max couldn't even beat me. Yeah, I think I'm feeling pretty good about that right now. And yeah, it was the second run that really did him in. And just to get into it a little bit, he got into turn 1, got out of turn 2, picked up some understeer, got a little twitch, and he knew at that point he wasn't going to be faster than his first lap. So he just backed out of it and rolled on into the pits, which I don't know if I agree with that, that you can pick up more time other places. So he might have picked up more time in the second sector. Sometimes those things can work in your favor because your tires are so marginal. I mean, we think of these tires that go 20, 30 laps, whatever, in a race. But in qualifying, the absolute best of those tires oftentimes won't quite even last a whole lap. A lot of people don't know that. But the drivers can feel that. And for whatever reason, he decided that it wasn't going to be, it was a big enough loss. Maybe he said he turned his delta off on his dash a couple of races ago. Maybe it was on there. He could see how much he'd already lost and knew he wasn't going to get it back. But also after the race, I think it was Juan Pablo talking on F1 TV. He said, also at that point, you're looking for hundreds on that second lap. And maybe he just went into it trying to get a bit too much. Now, I don't know that I fully agree with it, but it's very easy to see where he might have just been, engineers like, we can see you're faster in sector 1, you're faster in sector 3, but you were a little bit slower in sector 2, your tires were a little bit hot. Okay, well, let's adjust our tire prep. And suddenly going into that first turn or 2, tires are a little bit cooler. The grip isn't quite the same, not quite what he'd been used to. It just, the tiniest margins here. And from a sporting point of view, from a psychological point of view, you can't be down on yourself if you've gone for it. If you go for it, you accept the result. And sometimes that means that you win. Sometimes it means that you lose. Here he lost the lap, but he was already faster the first time around. And that's not what we saw in sprint qualifying so much. So I think it counts as a big win for Lando. Going into tomorrow, I think he's very, very well set. Just got to follow his teammate around and not let Max get under his skin. But also, if you're Piastri, you also got to kind of love it. I mean, to talk about it, he's just been absolutely battered by the car performance, by the run of tracks, by the run of his weakest tracks when he is at his most visible on the comms. And, I do love a lot of my TV comms guys. I love my Julian. I love them all. But they have a real tendency, even when I think they're trying to be fair, to put way more onto the driver than is actually there. If I'm Piastri, I'm just like, there's not much I can do. You've given me a car that isn't as compliant as it was last year on the tracks that I always did the worst on. And not the least bit unexpectedly, my teammate on the tracks that he's best on is doing well, and I'm struggling, which, I'm going to point out, Lando did this early on in the season, and nobody made a super big deal about that. So he comes under all this attention, and it's not so much if he was left alone, but just the constant, relentless barrage of questions about it. And always the questions aren't going to be about the car or the engineering. It's going to be like, well, how is your head? Is this doing your head in? Are you feeling like maybe you're going to lose? What a nightmare. So yeah, huge weight off his shoulders. He's shown up, shown that he's not forgotten how to drive. So he's put all those questions behind him. And his teammate left an open goal. Can't beat that. Actually, he did beat that. And that's why he's a pole sitter today. And the two of them go into this race tomorrow and go into the final race looking very likely to be the only candidates. And so that brings us to Max. Now I did do a thing where I sort of went through, because we had the sprint quali. And so I got kind of interested. I'm like, well, who did better? Who did worse? Piastri, obviously, couldn't have done better. Could have done worse, but didn't. So the two of them did the same. Max actually had a pretty big improvement. He picked up 3 places, which means that Red Bull, for all they haven't given him the car he really needed here, have also been able to get it closer to where it needs to be, just to keep him in with a chance. And that's really, I think, where he is. I was surprised. He came third. He was off by a very big margin, and he about halved it. He was about 0.2 off of Piastri, who's, since Norris didn't do a second run, we're going to use Piastri's time here. About 0.2 off. He was almost 0.5 off in sprint quali. So congratulations to Red Bull. But if you listen to Max talk, he's got shifting issues. The car is still jumpy. And my suspicion is in the race tomorrow, even though we didn't quite see it in the sprint or we didn't hear about it, my suspicion is the last 4 or 5 laps of whatever stint lengths they are going to run, the longest on, he's going to have a harder time with the tires than either of the two McLarens that just look like they've mostly got it figured out. Also because the lap times are so much slower. Lap times are much slower, so the drivers themselves have a lot more margin for catching things and managing things. And Max will be very much on the absolute limit of what his car will give him to just sort of keep up and hope that a safety car, virtual safety car, with the gravel, anything, late in the season, someone's engine goes pop, and you just happen to have made that window for yourself where you can take advantage of it. That's really, I think, where Max and Red Bull will be looking. I mean, they will be aggressive in their strategies. They will look to maximize what they have. But the reality is the car he's in is definitely slower than the two McLarens. And he's also maybe going to have to worry a bit about the two Mercedes directly behind him, because Mercedes did lock out fourth and fifth. So that's our top five. I find it interesting, just to go back to McLaren one more time. The people watch qualifying. They don't realize there's a strategy to it. There's a plan to it. The out laps are planned. The in laps are planned. You have to recharge your battery on the way in. If you don't get that done between the in lap and the out lap, then you don't have a full energy charge to waste on your single lap. Sometimes you cool for one lap. Sometimes you cool for two. All of this takes time. All of this takes place on a track that might have other cars on it. And your driver always wants the following two things. They don't want anyone in front of them, unless they can pick up a toe at the end, which we actually saw Piastri do in the first run of the last qualifying session. And they want to be the last person across the line. Those two things are generally contradictory. You usually get one or the other, but not both. And I think we saw Norris go out early. And I'm curious whether there's a McLaren miscalculation, or it had to do with some change to his tire prep, like he had to slow down more than they thought to get him in the window, or whatever. But as he was coming into turn one on his final run, he not only had 3 or 4 cars already out there in a line, he had another 1 or 2 or 3 coming out of the pits, all headed towards turn one right as he came by them and had to turn into it. And so it's the little things like that sometimes when you're like, well, why did my favorite driver, who's a midfield driver that they didn't even talk about, why did he suddenly do so poorly? Well, it's literally something like that. The team put him out. They ran into traffic in the wrong place, going into sector 2, the twisty tight turn, and there's just somebody parked right there. They can't take their favorite line. They have to lift a little bit because they're suddenly not sure of what the other person's going to do. Or, worst case scenario, you roll around the bend all ready to go, and there's Alonso a second and a half ahead of you, and you want a car nowhere within 8 seconds of you going into turn one, plus you're going to be stuck behind his slow Aston to boot. It's just not a good look. And these things happen constantly, and it's a real challenge, I think, for the teams and the strategists to figure out when to put the cars out so that they don't ruin their tire prep getting a gap, but also that their lap subsequently isn't ruined by traffic that is on their in or out lap, just in an inconvenient place. And to make it more fun, little known fact, the GPS isn't quite accurate enough to be fully helpful to the teams and drivers. I think they have more accurate stuff when they get to the timing loops, but there's a little bit of guesswork that also has to go into it. And never mind, the race engineers are getting tons of information they have to process and then give to the drivers at the most inconvenient possible times. So Mercedes, Russell, the first driver we get to in the top 10 who did worse, but only by 1 place. And that's really less him doing worse and more Max doing better, I think. Antonelli, big improvement. Hadjar, big improvement. Sainz. So these are all teams that took what they had and made it better. Or their direct rivals were already at their maximum. I think your big loser here is Alonso, who possibly after the sprint race realized how terrible Sunday was going to be and just whatever. But more likely, I think Aston made changes to try and make them more competitive in the race a little bit, because they do struggle sometimes with tires and stuff like that, as Mercedes does. And then that was a negative consequence in terms of what it let him do in qualifying. And then Gasly, of course, 10 places better. Congratulations. No one saw that coming. And good luck tomorrow. Good for them. Good for Alpine. And I think for him too, because it's tough to be in a car that's not performing, that's not letting you at least get the most out of your skills. Yeah. And so you think about the totality of it. I do sometimes. And I am now, because that's sort of what I'm here to do, share my totality with you. And you look at the you look at the margins we have right now, and one of the things just sort of more generally about qualifying right now that is nice is the cars have gotten close enough. Like, I think I looked in maybe Q1, and there was maybe to whoever's in third, a gap of more than a tenth. And then I think you had to get back almost to be like 16 or 17 to find another gap that was as big as a tenth between everyone's best laps. We're really in a place where the car is a limit, and usually the car is the limit. No amount of good driving will make it better. But we are happily in a place where the drivers really are able to make a difference. And that's part of why it was exciting today in a way that the sprint race perhaps was not so much. Because I think a lot of the sprint race was being used to just run data for Sunday's race. If you weren't aware, they did raise the tire pressures overnight, which partially invalidates all the data that they got from the one session they were able to run. Very interesting. Other thing to consider too, that we saw, that was a particular player. You noticed it most, I think, in the second session, as a lot of people running laps on old tires. Now, that's a normal thing in Q3 for your midfielders who probably had to do an extra run on fresh tires to get there. But we saw a lot of teams not only making runs on used tires, but we saw, and McLaren, we saw that the used tire was actually the fastest for Piastri, not for Norris. And I think some other teams had that as well. And it baffles everybody why that is. It shouldn't be that way. That used tire should be a little bit slower. But why were they saving tires like that? Well, the answer is simple. They actually have less tires in a sprint weekend than they get in a normal Grand Prix weekend. They only get 12 sets. They get, I wrote it down so I would not forget, and it's all the way down here at the bottom of my notes. 2 sets of hards, 4 mediums, and 6 sets of softs. And that's because you have to use the medium for 2 of your sprint qualifying sessions, and the mediums are generally more robust. So if you've gone out and done just a qualifying lap on them, they're not that different to new, except here, where that will count those 3 laps that you did will count as part of your lap life, meaning your maximum stint. If you put on a used set of mediums that just did a qualifying run, for example, well, your maximum stint now is just 22 laps, not 25. And that makes all of the math a little bit harder for the race on Sunday. So we did see even the top teams, we've seen numbers like 5 and 7 when I looked at I came in and saved sector times and stuff like that just so I could analyze them later. And you look at the tire life, you're like, I don't see the number 7 next to a soft tire very often in qualifying. But that's why the teams are having to play very carefully with the tires that they have in order to get the stint lengths on the tire compounds they want in the race. And the other thing is, and maybe this goes to a little bit to why the used tires are doing better is these are all handmade tires at the end of the day. They are not perfectly 100% exactly always the same. Teams will go to great lengths early on to pick out the sets they think are going to be the best sets for the weekend and use them as strategically as possible. So it's possible, just one of the tires they wound up being on didn't quite have the pace, and it was a little bit, I don't want to say it's a duff tire, but there'll be some variance there. And again, with margins that are in the hundredths of a second, that could easily explain why your favorite driver didn't do as well as you wanted him to this weekend. Other reason being, of course, like just an odd gust of wind at particularly the wrong moment. Again, when you're into hundreds, even those little tiny things will make a difference between drivers in the same cars. And that sort of brings me broadly to the end of what I think I wanted to talk about. There's a lot of sadness at the far end of the grid. Obviously everyone's been worried very much about Lewis, and today didn't reassure anyone at all. Give him a day or two and he'll be back out, sort of with his usual front and center, stoic, we will go on, we will make, there's another season to come. But I do like that Leclerc, as his teammate, said, I'm going to go out and put on a show and demonstrate to the world exactly what we've gotten, what we have to work with here. And it gave us probably the most exciting moment of qualifying once they played it, which was his high-speed spin. And then I guess we're talking about non-player characters here. Carlos Sainz dragging that sticker onto the circuit and red flagging everything. Well, thanks, appreciate that. I certainly had those extra 15 minutes or whatever it took to get that thing cleared, planned into my very busy schedule today. And so there you go. I mean, that's where we are. Oh yeah, one more thing. I did do a little bit of analysis. I know I sort of said I was going to raw dog this old school, just watch it, give my reactions about who I think is going to do well tomorrow. I think, Sainz, if he doesn't get a grid penalty, love him for another points result here. Mercedes, very happy getting Antonelli and Russell together. But I did have the one more thing that I did with the analysis, which is one of my favorite things to do. If you have timing, you can play this game at home. Sector times, the end of each session, grab the fastest sector times, because this is the way you can then look at a circuit map and say, where do the cars have strengths, where the cars have weaknesses? And what we saw when we did this analysis, and when I say we, I mean me, of course, here, but you're welcome to pretend you did it at home if you like, is that across all three sectors, McLaren was very strong. Red Bull was competitive with them in the first and third sectors. And I'm just going to scroll down and check my little Q3 notes here, make sure I've remembered this correctly. And then Mercedes had the most variance in they were across the board stronger in the first and second sector. And then in the third sector, they seemed to be a little more off. I mean, actually, Russell was incredibly consistent. He was fourth in every sector. Antonelli was fifth, second, and then ninth in the third sector, which, again, that's that tire thing. Just used up all of his tires, and then you need that traction coming out of the final turn, and it's just not quite there. Real art to doing that. So if you've made it this far, I would love, in fact, for you to join me, Spanners, and Stuffy for our race review tomorrow, where I will continue to talk endlessly about all sorts of entertaining tire facts, plus some things that actually happen in the race.